You have to face this problem. You can't keep running away anymore.
I stood in the middle of the living room, shouting at Mark. At that moment, I felt like all the emotions I had been suppressing finally burst out. I, a 34-year-old woman, whose seemingly perfect life was now crumbling around me, and Mark, my husband, was the cause of it all. But what happened next completely changed the course of our lives. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Worldly Whispers. Let's step into this story together. Not long ago, our lives seemed to be in perfect order. I was a graphic designer, indulging in creating beautiful visual works every day, which was my passion. Mark was a software engineer, spending all his time with lines of code. We also had two lovely children. Lily, our 10-year-old daughter, had long wavy brown hair that swayed gently as she ran, and her bright blue eyes were always filled with curiosity. Ben, our 5-year-old son, had chubby cheeks and a messy mop of blonde curls. He was like a little sun, running around the house full of energy, bringing us endless joy. I still remember when I was pregnant with Ben. It was a complete nightmare. All kinds of complications emerged, seriously endangering the lives of both me and Ben. I was in and out of the hospital frequently, and every breath was accompanied by unbearable pain. The doctors monitored my condition closely all the time, and the medicine they prescribed only alleviated the pain a little. In the months before Ben was born, and even for several months after his birth, sex was the last thing on my mind. When I was so close to death and my body was still struggling to recover, with every movement feeling like a huge challenge, how could I possibly think about that? I always thought Mark understood me. He never put any pressure on me and didn't even ask me about it. I naively thought it was his consideration for my pain, but I never imagined that he was seeking release elsewhere. A few months ago, the Child Protective Services, CPS, showed up at our door without warning. At that moment, my heart sank, and fear immediately overwhelmed me. My mind was racing, thinking about what we could have done wrong to draw their attention. Had we neglected the children's vaccination? Or had the neighbors complained about the noise at home? But the truth was far more unexpected than I could have imagined. A woman I had never met died unfortunately in a car accident. She left behind a daughter, and Mark's name was on the girl's birth certificate. In that woman's will, Mark was named as the father of the child. At first, I simply couldn't believe it and thought it must be a mistake. How could Mark have a child with someone else? It was absurd. But then, he had to confess to me. It turned out that when I was pregnant and going through the aftermath of being on the verge of death, Mark had an affair with a woman he met at work. He casually said that the woman was going through a tough time, and he was just helping out. The CPS staff explained to us that Mark was the little girl's closest relative, and he had the responsibility to take care of her, because the woman's family didn't want anything to do with this poor child at all. When the staff asked if we were willing to take her in, I agreed almost without hesitation. I knew it might be a hasty decision, but I just couldn't bear to see that little girl alone in the world. She was Mark's responsibility, and now, naturally, she had become our responsibility too. I told Mark that I would take care of arranging the necessary health checks and would do everything required by the CPS. I only hoped that he could explain the situation to our children. But in the end, he did nothing. I had to clean up the empty room alone, carefully choose new furniture, and find all kinds of toys for the new member of our family. Lily and Ben attended private schools, and now with one more child, the financial pressure increased sharply. In order to make ends meet, I took on more projects at work. I often sat in front of the computer for hours, my eyes sore and my body exhausted. I also had to bravely tell our extended family about this, because Mark was too ashamed to face it. All these difficult things fell on my shoulders while he just stood aside, like an outsider, doing nothing. Now, as I sit here, looking back on all that has happened, my heart is filled with a deep sense of betrayal. How could Mark do this to us? To me, to our children? Our once happy and perfect family is now in pieces, and I don't know how to fix it. I don't want to divorce him because I know it will be devastating for the children. But at the same time, I can't keep living like this either. This huge secret is like a heavy cloud, hanging over us, bringing unbearable pressure to all of us. 2 weeks ago, the day finally arrived when Mark's daughter, Ella, was officially going to join our family. I had been dreading this moment for a long time, not because of Ella herself, but because I knew it would be a huge shock for Lily and Ben. And as it turned out, I was right. The moment Ella walked through the front door, her eyes widened, filled with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Lily and Ben stared at her as if they were looking at a stranger from another planet. "Who is she?" Lily blurted out, her voice laced with confusion and a hint of anger. My heart sank. This was exactly the situation I had tried to avoid by asking Mark to talk to the kids in advance. I took a deep breath and explained as gently as I could. Kids, this is Ella. She's your half-sister. Ben looked at me with his innocent big eyes, not fully understanding what that meant yet. But Lily's face turned bright red, and within seconds, she burst into tears. Her sobs were so loud and heart-wrenching that Ben started crying too. And poor Ella, who had just entered this strange new environment, was so frightened that she joined in the crying. I quickly rushed to comfort Lily first, pulling her into my arms. Honey, I know this is a big surprise, but we have to be kind to Ella. She's been through a lot. But Lily just pushed me away, screaming, I don't want a sister. Why didn't you tell me before? I looked over at Mark, who was standing there like a statue, his face as white as a sheet. I really wanted to shout at him, to ask him why he had left me alone to deal with this mess. But at that moment, I had to focus on the kids. After what seemed like an eternity, I finally managed to calm the kids down a bit. I took Ella to her new room, which I had decorated with colorful wallpaper and filled with a bunch of soft stuffed toys. I hoped this would make her feel more at home, but as I watched her quietly sit on the edge of the bed, looking around with a dazed expression, I knew this was just the beginning of a long and difficult journey. In the following days, the tension at home was palpable. Lily wouldn't even look at Ella. Every time Ella tried to get close to her, Lily would turn around and walk away. Ben was a bit more open-minded, but he was still very confused. He often asked me questions like, why is she living with us now? Where's her mom? I tried my best to answer his questions, but I could see he was struggling to make sense of it all. I also started to notice the strange looks we got from outside. When I took the kids to the grocery store or the park, I could feel people's eyes on us. It was as if they could sense that there was something unusual about our family. When I took the 3 kids to the doctor for their regular check-ups, the doctor's assistant gave me a puzzled look when she saw Ella. I could tell she was wondering what this little girl's relationship was to our family. At home, the financial pressure was becoming more and more obvious. Ella's tuition fees, combined with Lily and Ben's, were putting a huge strain on our budget. I had been working overtime, but it still wasn't enough. I had to cut back on some expenses, like eating out and buying new clothes. But Mark didn't seem to care. He often came home late from work, not even bothering to ask how the kids were or how I was doing. One night, after the kids had gone to bed, I decided to have a serious talk with Mark. I found him sitting on the couch in the living room, staring blankly at the TV. Mark, we need to talk, I said firmly. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with guilt and impatience. About what? He asked, as if he had no idea what I was referring to. I sat down next to him and took a deep breath. We can't keep living like this. The kids are suffering, and we're in a difficult financial situation. You have to start taking some responsibility. You need to talk to Lily and Ben and explain the situation properly. And we need to figure out a way to make our family work again. Mark just sighed and looked away. I know, he said, but his tone was perfunctory. I just don't know what to say to them. I'm so ashamed. I felt a surge of anger rising inside me. Ashamed? You should be ashamed. But that's no excuse for not being a father to our kids and to Ella. You created this mess, and you have to help clean it up. Mark didn't respond. He just sat there, looking defeated. At that moment, I knew I couldn't rely on him to solve the problem. I had to figure it out on my own. I decided to start by making a list of all the things we needed to do to help Ella adjust to her new environment and to get our family back on track. I made an appointment with a family counselor, hoping they could help us work through our problems. I also started looking for ways to increase our income, like taking on some freelance graphic design projects in my spare time. Most importantly, I promised myself that I would do everything in my power to make this new family work, even if it meant doing everything alone. That night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, an overwhelming sense of sadness washed over me. Our once happy family was so different from what it used to be, but I wouldn't give up. I knew there would be tough times ahead, but for the sake of the kids, I was determined to fight for our family. The days blurred together in a constant struggle to maintain peace at home and deal with the ever-increasing chaos. I was constantly on the go, juggling work, the needs of the kids, and the new responsibilities that came with Ella's arrival. And Mark, well, he seemed to be physically and emotionally distancing himself from us more and more. One afternoon, I was helping Lily with her homework when she suddenly burst into tears again. I put down my pen and pulled her close to me. Honey, what's wrong? I asked softly, gently stroking her hair. She sobbed. Mom, I got bullied at school. They said I have a bad dad because of Ella. My heart shattered into a million pieces. I had no idea that the situation in our family had reached Lily's school. I hugged her tightly, trying to comfort her. Baby, it's not your fault. Your dad made a mistake, but that doesn't mean he's a bad person. We're all going to get through this together. But deep inside, I was seething with anger at Mark. His actions were not only affecting me, but also hurting our innocent children. That night, after the kids were in bed, I decided to talk to Mark again. I found him in his home office, pretending to work. Mark, we have a serious problem. My voice trembled with anger and frustration. Lily is getting bullied at school because of what you did. You have to do something. You have to talk to her and make her feel better. Mark looked up at me, his eyes filled with shock and guilt. I had no idea, he said softly. I'm so sorry, but his apology sounded hollow. I had heard it too many times, and yet he still hadn't taken any real action to fix the problem. I sat down across from him, my eyes fixed firmly on his. Mark, this isn't just about Lily. The whole family is falling apart. We need help. We have to go to family therapy, and the kids need individual counseling. You can't keep avoiding this. Mark shifted uneasily in his seat. I don't think that's a good idea, he said. I don't want to be judged by some stranger. I couldn't believe my ears. Judged? Mark, we're in a crisis. Our family is in pieces. Do you really care more about what some therapist might think than about the happiness of our children? Mark looked away, unable to meet my gaze. At that moment, I knew I was fighting a losing battle. If he wasn't willing to seek help, I had to figure out a way to help the kids on my own. The next day, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I called a local therapist who specialized in family issues and made appointments for Lily and Ben. I also started looking for support groups for children whose parents had issues with infidelity. I knew I couldn't change Mark, but I would do everything in my power to make sure the kids were okay. As I was researching online, I came across an article about parental rights and custody. An idea popped into my head. I started considering the thought of asking Mark to transfer custody of Ella to me. In the short time Ella had been with us, I had grown fond of the little girl, and I was worried that if things continued like this, Mark would neglect her, or even worse. I knew this was a huge decision, and I needed to think it through carefully. But the more I thought about it, the more it seemed like the right thing to do. I couldn't let Ella suffer because of Mark's mistakes. I decided to talk to my own family about it. My mother, who had always been my rock, listened patiently as I poured my heart out. I think you're doing the right thing, she said. You're a good mother, and you'll take care of all the kids, no matter what. With my mother's support, I felt a bit more confident. I started gathering the necessary information about the custody transfer process. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but for Ella's sake, I was determined to do it. Meanwhile, the tension at home continued to escalate. Lily's behavior became more and more erratic. She would have sudden outbursts of anger and then shut herself off, refusing to talk to anyone. Ben also started showing signs of distress. He had trouble sleeping and was more clingy than usual. I was at my wit's end. I tried to be strong in front of the kids, but every day was a struggle. I woke up every morning dreading the new day, but I knew I couldn't give up. I had to keep fighting for my family, even if it meant going against Mark. One night, as I was making dinner, I heard a knock on the door. It was Mark's parents. They had come to talk to us, or rather, to talk to me. We know what's going on, Mark's mother said. We think you should give Mark another chance. He made a mistake, but he loves you and the kids. I looked at them in disbelief. Another chance? He hasn't done anything to fix the problem. He won't even seek help for our family. How can I just forget all this and move on? Mark's father spoke up. We'll talk to him. We'll make him see sense. Give him a little more time. I was torn. On one hand, I wanted to believe that Mark could change. On the other hand, I had been hurt so many times, and I was extremely worried about the kids. After a long and difficult conversation, I finally agreed to give Mark another chance. But I made it clear that if he didn't start taking responsibility and trying to fix our family, I would have no choice but to take more drastic measures. After Mark's parents left, I felt a mix of hope and trepidation. I hoped that this time, Mark would finally step up and be the husband and father we needed. But I also knew that there was a high chance he would let us down again. Only time would tell. Since Mark's parents came to plead for him, days passed and turned into a week. I was eagerly looking forward to seeing some signs of change in him. Every morning when I woke up, a glimmer of hope would rise in my heart, telling myself that perhaps this day would be the one when Mark finally took on his responsibilities. However, as the days went by, my hope started to fade again. At first, Mark did try to seem more like a part of the family. He would come home a bit earlier from work and even offer to help put the kids to bed. But his actions felt as if he was just going through the motions. His interactions with the kids were awkward and forced. Lily, still deeply hurt, hardly responded to him, and Ben seemed confused by his father's sudden change in behavior. One night, I suggested that we all watch a movie together as a family. I thought it might be a good way to bring everyone together and start mending some of the broken relationships. I popped some popcorn, made hot chocolate, and gathered the kids in the living room. Mark joined us too, but he seemed distracted, constantly checking his phone under the pretext of work messages. Halfway through the movie, Lily suddenly stood up and stormed out of the room. "I don't want this," she shouted. "Things aren't getting better at all, and I can't pretend everything is okay." I quickly followed her, leaving Mark and Ben in the living room. I found Lily in her room, lying on the bed and crying. I sat down beside her and gently rubbed her back. "Honey, I know it's hard, but we're all trying. Your dad is trying too." Lily turned to look at me, her eyes filled with anger and pain. "He's not trying, Mom. He's just pretending everything is normal, but it's not. He lied to us, and now everything is a mess." Her words stung me because I knew she was right. Mark's efforts were clearly not enough. When I returned to the living room, Ben was on the verge of tears. "I don't like it when Lily is sad," he said. Mark just sat there, looking helpless. I glared at him, my patience wearing thin. "Mark, this is exactly what I was afraid of. You can't just show up and expect everything to go back to normal. You have to really talk to the kids, let them know you're sorry, and that you're committed to fixing this problem." Mark finally put down his phone and sighed. "I know, I'm just not good at this. I don't know how to make things right." His words only frustrated me more. "You have to figure it out, Mark. Our family is at stake." The next day, I decided to take Ella to the park. I thought some fresh air and playtime might do her good, and it would also give me a chance to bond with her away from the tense atmosphere at home. As we were on the swings, I noticed a group of moms chatting nearby. One of them looked at me and Ella, and I could sense that the inevitable question was coming. "Is she your daughter?" she asked with a friendly smile. I took a deep breath. "Yes, she is my daughter. Well, my husband's daughter, and now she's part of our family." The woman's eyes widened slightly, but she quickly regained her composure. "Oh, that's nice. It's always great to see a family coming together like this." Her words were kind, but I could feel the curiosity behind them. When we got home from the park, I found a note left by Mark. He said he would be working late again. I crumpled up the note in frustration. This was exactly what I didn't want. With him always being away, I was left to deal with the kids' emotional issues alone, along with the growing financial pressure. I decided to call my sister. She had gone through a difficult divorce herself, and I needed someone to talk to. I poured my heart out to her, and she listened patiently. "You know, you don't have to go through this alone," she said. "If Mark isn't willing to take responsibility, you might be better off without him. You're more than capable of taking care of the kids on your own." Her words resonated with me, but I was still hesitant. I didn't want to be a single mom, and I was also worried about the impact of divorce on the kids. But at the same time, I couldn't keep living in this uncertainty, constantly waiting for Mark to change. That night, when Mark finally came home, I decided to have another serious talk with him. I told him about Lily's outburst during the movie night and how Ben was also suffering. I also shared with him my conversation with my sister. "Mark, we have to make a decision. Either we fully commit to fixing our family, or we have to consider other options." Mark looked at me with a pained expression. "I don't want to lose you and the kids. I'll do better, I promise." But I had heard his promises before. I told him I needed to see actions, not just words. I also reminded him about the family therapy and the kids' counseling. "We have to start next week," I said firmly. "No more excuses." Mark reluctantly agreed, but I could tell he still wasn't fully on board. That night, as I went to bed, my mind was filled with uncertainty. I hoped that Mark would finally turn things around, but I was also preparing myself for the possibility that our marriage might be coming to an end. The next few weeks would be crucial, and I knew the future of our family hung in the balance. The days leading up to the first family therapy session were filled with a strange mix of anticipation and dread. I hoped that this would be the beginning of the healing process for our family, yet I was skeptical considering Mark's lukewarm attitude. Lily remained distant, and Ben, seemingly influenced by his sister, had also become quiet and withdrawn. Ella, on the other hand, was doing her best to fit in, but it was clear that she too felt the tense atmosphere at home. Finally, the day of the therapy session arrived. We all squeezed into the car, and the drive to the therapist's office was filled with an uneasy silence. Mark stole glances at me from time to time, as if trying to gauge my mood, but I was too preoccupied with driving and my own thoughts to pay much attention to him. When we arrived, Dr. Thompson, the therapist, greeted us with a warm smile. She was an older woman with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor. She led us into a cozy room furnished with comfortable chairs and soft lighting. As we sat down, I could feel the kids' nervousness. Lily kept fidgeting with the hem of her shirt, Ben clung tightly to my arm, and Ella looked around the room cautiously. Dr. Thompson asked each of us to share how we were feeling. I was the first to speak, pouring out my pain, the sense of betrayal, and the overwhelming stress I had been carrying. I talked about how hard I had been trying to hold the family together, but it felt like an uphill battle. Mark listened, his head bowed, and when I finished, he finally spoke up. I know I made a huge mistake. His voice was barely audible. I was selfish and didn't think about the consequences. I'm really sorry, not just to my wife, but to all of you. I want to make it right, but I don't even know where to start. Lily looked at him, her eyes a mix of anger and hurt. You lied to us, Dad. You messed up our lives. How can we ever trust you again? Her words were filled with emotion and echoed in the room. Dr. Thompson nodded, acknowledging the gravity of the situation. Trust takes time to rebuild, she said. But it's not impossible. That's why we're here, to work through these issues together. Over the next hour, we talked about our feelings, our fears, and our hopes for the future. Dr. Thompson gave us some homework, simple things like sharing our best memories and expressing gratitude for one another. It was slow going, but for the first time in a long while, I felt like we were actually making some progress. After the therapy session, the atmosphere in the car on the way home was a bit lighter. Mark even suggested stopping for ice cream on the way back, and to my surprise, the kids were excited about it. As we sat in the ice cream parlor, sharing cones and chatting, I couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could get through this. But the real test came when we got home. Mark took the initiative to help put the kids to bed, something he hadn't done in a long time. He read them stories, kissed them goodnight, and even sat with Lily for a while, talking about her day. I stood at the door watching, a lump forming in my throat. It was just a small step, but it was a step in the right direction. In the following weeks, Mark continued to make more of an effort. He started coming home on time and became more involved in the kids' lives. He helped Lily with her homework, played soccer with Ben in the backyard, and took Ella to the library every Saturday. The tension at home gradually eased, and the kids began to open up again. One night, as we were all sitting in the living room, Lily suddenly said, "I think I'm starting to like having a sister." We all turned to look at her, and a smile spread across Ella's face. It was a simple statement, but it meant the world to all of us. I knew we still had a long way to go. There were still many issues to be resolved, and the pain of Mark's betrayal would take time to fully heal. But for the first time in months, I felt like we were on the right track. We were becoming a family again, and I was grateful for every small victory along the way. As I looked around the room at my husband and children, I realized that sometimes, even the most broken things can be fixed, as long as we're willing to put in the effort. In that moment, I made a vow to keep fighting for our family, no matter what challenges lay ahead. The journey of our family's restoration was far from over, but we had taken a significant step forward. And as we continued on this path, I held on to the hope that our family would emerge stronger and more united than ever before.
If this story touched you, show your support by liking and subscribing. Your encouragement helps us keep sharing memorable stories. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you in the next one.